barbed wire glistened with frost. Watchtowers cut the sky like jagged teeth. Smoke rose from chimneys that never stopped. The Nazi camps were not accidents of war. They were factories of torment built with blueprints, managed with timetables, and carried out with a precision that transformed human cruelty into a daily routine. To enter the camp was not merely to lose freedom. It was to be stripped of name, dignity, and even the right to suffer privately. Torture here was not rare. It was constant, expected, demanded. And within this machinery of suffering lived stories of men and women whose agony still echoes across history. Today we recount 3 of them. Dachau, February 1941. The cold that morning was not just in the air, it lived in the bones of every prisoner. Frost clung to the barbed wire, the ground hard as stone. For Piotr Kowalski, a 29-year-old mechanic from Łódź, the morning would become a crucifixion. Before the war, Piotr's life had been simple. He repaired engines, bicycles, and anything with gears. His workshop smelled of grease and steel, his pride bound to machines that roared back to life under his hands. But when the Nazis occupied Poland, Piotr's skills turned to sabotage. He repaired resistance trucks in secret, hid weapons under broken floorboards, whispered freedom in the language of engines. When he was caught, the Gestapo beat him until his ribs cracked, then sent him to Dachau. He thought nothing could be worse than that journey days packed into a cattle car with no air, no food, only thirst and the stench of human waste. But the camp taught him otherwise. Dachau was not death alone. It was a place where suffering was refined into art. That February morning, an SS officer accused Piotr of sabotaging work after a machine broke down. The charge was false, but truth had no meaning here. He was dragged into the yard, stripped to his undershirt, and shoved against a wooden post. The punishment was Pfahlhängen. His wrists were yanked behind his back, bound tightly with coarse rope. The guards smirked. What came next was known among prisoners as a torture that few survived. Then, with a sudden jerk, he was hoisted upward. His body hung in midair, his shoulders twisting violently backwards. The first second was pain. The second was fire. Both shoulders dislocated with a crack like splitting wood. His scream tore through the courtyard, high and raw, before dissolving into hoarse gasps. The guards laughed. One lit a cigarette and exhaled smoke in Piotr's face. "How long will the mechanic last?" he sneered. Piotr's thoughts splintered. He tried to cling to silence, to grit his teeth. If I scream, I am theirs. If I endure, I am still Piotr. But his body betrayed him. His legs kicked helplessly, his chest heaved in agony, every nerve screaming louder than his will. Minutes dragged into eternity. His arms were dead weights, numb with lack of blood. His shoulders throbbed with waves of white-hot torment, as if knives had been driven into his joints. He wanted to faint, to escape into darkness, but his body refused. Around him, prisoners stood forced to watch. No one moved, no one spoke. To flinch was dangerous. To show pity was punishable. Their silence was another chain, binding Piotr to his suffering. His mind wandered. He saw his wife Katarzyna standing in their kitchen in Łódź, flour dusting her hands as she baked bread. He remembered the warmth of her touch, the smell of home. For one fleeting second he was not in Dachau, but the pain dragged him back. Hours passed. His voice broke, reduced to rasping groans. His head lolled forward, sweat and blood dripping onto the frozen earth. Each breath was a war, shallow and sharp. When at last the guards cut him down, he collapsed into the mud. His arms flopped uselessly at his sides, twisted grotesquely, bones and sinews ruined. He could not rise. He could barely breathe. The guards kicked him, laughing at his broken body. "Now fix your machines, mechanic," one barked. But Pyotr was not finished. Crawling on his elbows, dragging himself like a wounded animal, he whispered into the dirt, "You will not have my soul." That night, lying on a lice-ridden bunk, his body shook with fever. His arms hung lifeless, but his mind still burned. "I will remember this. I will carry this pain beyond these walls, and one day they will answer for it." Pyotr Kowalski survived Dachau. His arms were never whole again. His mechanic's hands would never repair another machine. But his memory endured, etched in scars, carried into testimony. His broken body became a monument of resistance, proof that even in silence, endurance is defiance. Pyotr's agony on the post was raw, brutal, and designed to break the body through spectacle. But cruelty had other faces. In Ravensbrück, it wore a white coat. For Clara Neumann, torture came not from the whip or chain, but from the scalp and from experiments that turned her body into a battlefield. Ravensbrück, July 1943. The women's camp at Ravensbrück looked orderly from a distance. Straight fences, barracks in rows, and a large brick building called the infirmary. But inside that infirmary, medicine was a mask for cruelty. Clara Neumann was 24, a medical student from Berlin. Before the war, she had spent her days dissecting textbooks, not flesh. She had believed science was sacred, a tool to heal. Her professors had praised her precision, her steady hands. But when she was caught handing out anti-Nazi leaflets with her friends, her hands were bound instead, and she was sent to Ravensbrück. Here, her knowledge of medicine was mocked. Instead of learning anatomy from books, she was forced to feel it carved into her own body. One morning, Clara was summoned to the infirmary. She walked past women coughing blood, and others collapsed in corners. The corridor smelled sharply of carbolic acid, overlaid with the stink of rot and infection. 2 SS doctors waited in white coats. To Clara, the white coat had once symbolized dignity. Now it meant only terror. They ordered her to lie on an iron bed. Straps bit into her wrists and ankles. A single bulb hung overhead, its glare blinding. She wanted to close her eyes, but fear forced them open. The scalpel came first, cold steel pressing against her thigh, then slicing deep. Pain burst like fire, spreading through her body. She bit her lip until blood filled her mouth, trying not to scream. They did not treat the wound. They contaminated it deliberately. Rusty nails, wood shavings, glass fragments pushed inside before being sewn shut with thick, filthy thread. She stared at the ceiling crack, focusing on its jagged line. "I am Clara. I am not their specimen. If I count each breath, I will survive this minute, then the next." When they unstrapped her, Clara could not walk. Guards dragged her back to the barracks. That night, fever raged through her body. Her leg throbbed, hot and swollen. Pus seeped through her uniform. She shook violently, drenched in sweat, lips cracked with thirst. Hallucinations came, her brother Ernst, calling her from a field of yellow wheat, sunlight spilling across his face. She whispered his name in the dark. "I must live for him." Days later, guards came again. She begged silently for death, but death was merciful, and Ravensbrück did not deal in mercy. Back on the table, the wound was reopened. The stench was unbearable, fetid, sour, thick enough to taste. The doctor's face remained expressionless as he scraped the bone with a metal probe. Clara screamed, the sound tearing her throat. The assistants wrote notes, unmoved. "I am Clara. I am not an object, not their specimen," she repeated inside, clinging to her name like a lifeline. The experiments continued for weeks. Injections of strange liquids that made her heart hammer violently, her body convulsing as though struck by lightning. On another occasion, they tested sulfa drugs, opening her wound again, smearing powders across raw tissue, watching as infection spread regardless. Sometimes she heard the doctors debate as if she were not present. "Excellent necrosis here. Let's measure nerve damage." Their words were clinical, detached, more chilling than the pain itself. At night, fellow prisoners tried to save her. Women tore strips from their uniforms to bandage her wounds. They shared their bread rations, whispering prayers in Polish, Czech, and French. They risked punishment for her because solidarity was the only antidote to despair. Clara whispered back, "If I die, remember me. If I live, I will tell the world." Her body weakened, but her mind sharpened. She began to memorize everything: the size of the instruments, the number of assistants, and the words the doctors used. Her memory became her shield. Every scar is a sentence. Every scream is evidence. By autumn, Clara could no longer walk without help. Her leg was deformed, twisted by repeated incisions and infections. Yet inside, she clung to defiance. "They can mutilate my body, but they cannot amputate my soul." Liberation came in 1945. American soldiers entered Ravensbrück to find Clara skeletal, barely more than skin and bones, hobbling on a crutch. When they asked what had been done to her, she pulled up her dress, showing scars carved like grotesque signatures into her thigh. Years later, at the Nuremberg doctor's trial, Clara stood before the court. Her voice did not tremble. She described the white coats, the glass fragments, the stench of decay, the injections that set her body convulsing. At the end, she lifted her skirt once more, revealing her scar. "This," she said, "is what medicine became under fascism." Her testimony silenced the courtroom. And in that silence, Clara reclaimed her identity, not as a victim, but as a witness. If Clara's torture was hidden behind white coats and the language of medicine, Josef Adler's was carved into stone and sweat. At Mauthausen, pain was not measured in incisions or injections, but in steps and the endless climb up the stairs of death. Mauthausen, October 1944. The quarry of Mauthausen stretched like a scar across the Austrian hillside, a pit carved by human suffering. For the SS guards, it was not just a worksite, it was a weapon. The prisoners called it the Stairs of Death, 186 jagged steps rising from the pit, steps slick with blood and sweat, steps designed to kill. Among the thousands forced to climb was Josef Adler, a 36-year-old Jewish violinist from Vienna. Before the war, Joseph had filled cafes with Strauss waltzes, drawn tears with Schubert adagios. Music had been his shield against the world's cruelty, but the Nazis had shattered his violin before his eyes, as if silencing the instrument would silence the man. Instead, they sent him here to carry stones until nothing of him remained. That October morning, frost clung to the quarry walls. Prisoners lined up at the base, gaunt figures in striped rags. The guards barked orders, "Stehen hoch!" "Lift the stone." Joseph bent, clutching a granite block heavier than his starving body could bear. His fingers, once so nimble on strings, bled instantly against the rough edges. "Climb!" a guard commanded, smirking. Step by step, Joseph rose. By the 10th stair, his breath came in gasps. By the 50th, his legs trembled. By the 100th, his chest burned like fire. Each stone crushed not only his shoulders, but his memory of freedom. Yet inside, a quiet melody played. "One more step, Joseph. One more. Don't let them own the silence." Around him, men collapsed. One prisoner dropped his stone, tumbling backwards and knocking two others down with him. Their bodies smashed against rock, lifeless before they reached the bottom. The guards erupted in laughter. "Clumsy swine!" they jeered, wagering cigarettes on who would fall next. Joseph kept climbing, eyes blurred with sweat and tears. He imagined his wife Miriam's face, the softness of her hands, the way she tilted her head when he played. He imagined his son Samuel, 7 years old, practicing on a child's violin. That image carried him to the top barely. He dropped to his knees, stone slipping from his grasp. The whip cracked across his back before he could draw breath. Pain burst, sharp and searing, but he did not cry out. "No sound," he told himself. "My voice belongs to me, not them." Day after day, the torment repeated. The quarry became an arena of despair. Sometimes the guards forced prisoners to run down the steps with stones, a cruelty designed for slaughter. One morning, Joseph watched a man trip near the top. He rolled, stone crashing onto his skull, blood staining the staircase crimson. The guards clapped as though watching a theater. Joseph's stomach churned, but he lifted his stone again. By night, he lay on a wooden bunk, back split open, muscles quivering. The barracks stank of urine, sweat, and disease. Rats scurried across the straw. Joseph traced invisible notes in the air, his fingers twitching as though a bow still rested between them. His bunkmates whispered prayers. Joseph hummed broken fragments of Brahms, too softly for guards to hear. It was his rebellion. Music lived in his breath, even if no violin remained. As weeks passed, his body wasted away, his spine bent under invisible weight, his hands cracked, blistered, raw. Yet still he carried stones. Survival became a performance climb, another movement in a silent symphony. Every lash of the whip was percussion, every gasp of breath a note. "You can kill me," he thought, "but you cannot erase my music." The guards devised games. One day they lined up 10 men at the top of the stairs, each with a stone. "Race!" they shouted. The men staggered downward. Joseph's knees buckled. He thought of letting go, letting the stone drag him into nothingness. But then he saw Samuel's smile in his mind, and he steadied himself. "Not yet, not while he still lives in me." Another day, Joseph was ordered to hold a stone above his head. His arms shook, tendons screaming. When it slipped, the whip carved stripes across his chest. His body was agony, but his mind clung to defiance. "This pain is not my final note. I will not give them silence." Winter deepened. Snow fell into the quarry, covering corpses left uncollected. Joseph carried stones with frozen hands, numb, but still bleeding. He no longer felt hunger, only hollow emptiness where food should have been. Yet each climb, he whispered Samuel's name. Each descent, he whispered Miriam's. Those whispers were his rhythm, his metronome against despair. When liberation came in May 1945, Joseph was skeletal, weighing barely 70 pounds. His spine was twisted, his hands ruined beyond repair. He would never play violin again. Yet when asked by an American soldier what he remembered most, he answered softly, "The stairs. Always the stairs." Every fall was a life silenced, every step a stolen symphony. Piotr, Clara, and Joseph represent the daily hell of Nazi camps. Shattered bodies, routine torture. Their survival was resistance. Their agony warns. Unchecked ideology and silence foster cruelty. The barbed wire remains, a stark reminder. If these stories moved you, do not let them fade. Share their names, their suffering, their strength. Like and subscribe to preserve memory, to uncover more hidden truths of history, and to ensure that daily hell never becomes daily life again. Because remembrance is resistance, and forgetting is surrender.